to the Care Right podcast, your go-to resource for all things elder care. Guiding us through this journey is Annalee Kruger, the founder of Care Right Incorporated, and she has been steadfastly supporting families across the United States. Each episode brings you expert insights, innovative strategies, and practical advice, ensuring that you're well equipped to provide the best possible care for your loved ones. Expect to gain valuable knowledge, learn from real-life stories, and get inspired to take action in your own caregiving journey. So buckle up as we dive into an in-depth discussion of elder care planning and together embrace the journey of caring for aging loved ones on the Care Right podcast.
Hi, everybody. My name is Annalee Kruger. I'm the president of Care Right Incorporated. We work with families across the country in developing customized aging plans. What's an aging plan? We work with families who are family caregivers, and they most likely are getting burned out taking care of aging parents, whether it's mom or dad or in-laws or aunts and uncles. Most of our families are pretty burned out when they come to us. Their situation is usually in a crisis. There's been a medical situation, and families really don't know what their options are. They may have tried to have their own family meeting, but they really don't know what to talk about and how to, understand what their care options are based on what their specific situation is. So we work with families across the country. We've been virtual since 2012. So thankfully, it did not take a pandemic for us at Care Right to have to pivot. We were already virtual because families don't live near each other. The days of families living down the street from each other are kind of long gone. So we've been virtual since 2012. We facilitate family meetings to find out what's working well, what's working less well. Is there dementia progression? Are there falls? Is there weight loss? Dad's getting lost driving. Mom's the caregiver to dad with dementia and he's getting worse, or mom's getting burned out. So those are our types of clients that we work with. And then we help you determine what your care options are based on what you can afford. We align the care team so that you understand what questions to ask and what to look for when you are working with home care companies or retirement communities, so you can make informed decisions all along the way and be supported and educated along the way. So I am excited today for our podcast guest. Going to pull up your bio and your information. So today I am excited to announce Susan Turnbull. She is our guest today. So welcome, Susan.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So I'm going to go over your bio because you're just doing amazing things that are unique, and I love to help consumers and professionals who listen to this podcast. I'd like to let them know what kind of resources are out there. And like I said before, we're all kind of the best kept secret, and we don't want to be kept secret anymore because we're all doing amazing things to help families have better outcomes. So Susan Turnbull is the founder and principal of Personal Legacy Advisors, a professional writer, speaker, and workshop facilitator. She is the author of The Wealth of Your Life, a step-by-step guide for creating your ethical will, co-author of Across Generations, a 5-step guide for creating an expression of donor intent, and the designer of the Life Legacy Cards and the Life Legacy Conversations tool, all designed for those who agree that personal wealth has tangible and intangible dimensions. In her fresh take on the meaning and dimensions of legacy, Susan's dynamic presentations and engaging materials appeal to audiences of financial, estate planning, and philanthropic advisors, as well as their clients and donors. Her work has been featured in many national publications, including the New York Times and USA Today. So welcome. I'm so glad that you were available to be our guest on this podcast. Like I said, you're doing amazing works. Tell me about yourself and kind of what got you started in this line of work.
Well, I'm happy to, and it's wonderful to be your guest, Annalie. So thank you for the invitation, and thank you for all of you that are listening for your interest in attending today. So a lot of people think that with the name of a business of personal legacy advisors, a lot of people assume that I'm either a financial advisor or an estate planning attorney. And as you described in the bio, I'm neither. I'm a writer by trade, a former journalist. And I did a lot of personal interest stories in my day. And I was always amazed at what people would tell me simply because I asked them some questions and I sat there and listened. And I oftentimes heard really amazing stories, wonderful stories, really profound revelations and, uh, um, reflections from people. And I oftentimes wondered, do their family members know some of these things? Who knows? Who else knows these things? And I always thought that you had to write an autobiography or a memoir to be able to create some kind of a record, a written record of your life. And about 20 years ago, I read about the idea of the Jewish ethical will. And I had no idea what an ethical will was, but I was intrigued by what I read about it. And I went and did some research about it. And I became so fired up about the idea of this thing called the ethical will that I really built a business and an area of expertise around it. So the short story of an ethical will is around 800 years ago in the Jewish tradition, you begin to see the expectation that fathers write to their sons sort of a letter of instruction about what it would mean to live a worthy or ethical life. And that's the derivation of the term ethical will, which, let's face it, is kind of a hard term. I mean, you put ethical and will in the same phrase. It's like, oh, get me out of here. Sounds so stern and lecturish. And they're the opposite of that. An ethical will, especially a contemporary version of an ethical will, is really a letter of love that's written from an older generation to a younger generation, with the opportunity to, in a short space, rather than an autobiography or a memoir, in a short space, put down whatever it is you want to make sure that your loved ones get from you and hear from you without question. So it's a record of your life. It's part of the record of your life, but in a very short form. Instead of an autobiography, which is kind of, which takes a chronological view of your life, it's an opportunity to take sort of a 30,000-foot view and say, well, in a few pages, what would I want to make sure that my loved ones heard from me without question? So it's the opportunity to talk, to express, first of all, how you feel about them, what some of your values are, what information would you want to make sure that they knew and that they had from you, whether that's an information about what's in your estate plan, the intentions behind that, or why you chose to give a lot of money to philanthropy, or just what your views are about money. So a lot of people use these as side documents, and they're non-binding, by the way, as side documents to an estate plan, to really pass on the intangible aspects of your wealth, your values, your stories, your feelings, your reflections. And that's where it sits in the world of estate planning. And anyone, regardless of their level of wealth, anyone, and regardless of their age, can write this letter, and I'm sure, or letters. So it's not just one document. For many people, it's perhaps a collection of them written with individual messages to different people. I consider that they're not only monologues, which is what a letter is sort of in its natural form. It's a monologue, but that I think there's great value in it being shared during life, as well as being kept and to be accessible after a person is no longer alive. Because sometimes, a lot of times, and I know a lot of you know this, it's easier to say things in writing than it is face to face, especially some of these intimate things. And so to be able to share them during life as a work in progress, because you, the author, is a work in progress, and so is your audience a work in progress. So to think about this as something that you start at any time in your life. You don't have to wait till you're on death's door to be able to create this. You never know what's going to happen tomorrow. So I always say, let's start with something small, create something of a page or two, and then add to it as time and circumstance allow. Ethical wills are not long. They tend to be anywhere from a page to 20 pages. 20 would be a long document. And so that's sort of an overview of what I got very excited about when I read about this. Was this is the missing piece of estate planning, where you spend a lot of time working with professionals to think about what you want your loved ones to have in a material sense, but there's a lot you want them to know and understand and take from you that isn't material. And of course, you're living out every day, you're living out your values, and you're having conversations, and you're sharing a lot of this every day. But to think about, what do you want to communicate with intention in a way that's going to be enduring? That is a really important thing to think about, for anyone to think about, in terms of thinking about what they want to leave behind, what they want their legacy to be. So when I first started my practice about 20 years ago, because I had skills as a journalist, I started ghostwriting them and kind of hung up a shingle and said, I do this, I can provide some structure, I can provide some accountability. I marketed myself through advisors from the beginning, because they were working with people that had thinking about legacy, and this idea of this missing piece seemed so obvious to me. And then along the way, I designed a guidebook called The Wealth of Your Life, a step-by-step guide for creating your ethical will. This was mentioned in the introduction. And then for people that are creating some kind of a philanthropic instrument and would want to talk about why they were doing, why I had done that, whether it was a foundation or a donor advised fund, there's a guidebook for that too. And then I also developed these wonderful conversation cards. It's just 12 in a set, and they are open-ended prompts for conversation to begin to talk about some stories from your life and share some reflections. And those are great for family gatherings, family meetings. They're also great for advisors to use with their clients to just talk about, I want to understand a little bit more about you. And they naturally lead, and very quickly lead, into really wonderful conversations. So those are the tools that I have. You can find all of those on my website, which is personallegacyadvisors.com. I also give a lot of workshops and presentations, especially for clients of financial advisors and estate planning attorneys who really want to be able to present this idea to their clients. And I also do, as my capacity allows, I don't do ghostwriting anymore, but I do coaching for people who want to have an accountability partner. So that is, in a very quick overview, what I do and how I came to it.
I think those are important. I think what you've created and what you do is important. With our aging plans, one of the things that we talk about with families, and we have the grab and go binder, that emergency kind of get all of your documents in order. And we also have a tab in there it's called an About Me tab. What do you want to what do you want your family to know about you? One of the things I have found kind of surprising in my 30 years of working with families as a social worker is families don't really talk about like their lives. I'm not sure what all they talk about, but they don't. I've had so many adult children not even know that their parent, that their father was a vet, or anything about their childhood. And so one of the things I like to do, and it kind of tags along with what you're doing, but I have them fill out, it's called a social history. Like, what is it about me that you want your kids to know? What are my accomplishments in life? But I also like it. I also encourage my clients to do video recordings. You don't have to be next to each other. You can do a Zoom recording. I have hours and hours and hours of cassette tapes from when we had our grandparents living with us when we were little. So like 40 years ago. We didn't have video back then. We had cassette tapes. And so we would interview my grandparents and have them tell stories about their childhood and their life. My grandfather was a blacksmith, and most people don't even know what that is anymore.
Yeah.
And so we did the same thing, us kids did the same thing with our parents. We interview them and, and get their life story on video. And I have to say, now that my mother has passed away, it's really comforting to just watch these videos and see all of her little smiles and her little intricacies. My mother had dementia, and while it's a terrible, terrible disease and heart-wrenching for all of us in that dementia journey, I got to learn a lot about my mom and her childhood, because that's where her memories were, right? Her short-term memory was pretty bad, but her long-term memory was really good. And so it's really, for those that are listening or watching this, you, Susan, have amazing tools that can help open up the doors of conversation.
Yeah.
You've made a life work of this, trying to help families get a little bit more educated and understand their loved ones in a much more in-depth, detailed way that helps build those family relationships.
Well, you're spot on about so many points, Annalee, so many points. I think that to what you said about kids and grandkids sometimes don't know their parents and grandparents. I think people make the mistake of thinking, one, they already know it. Somehow they've already absorbed those stories, or they're not that interested, or they're not that interesting. And so people, and they don't really know where to begin. They don't want to appear like they're being self-absorbed or self-centered. And so the conversations don't happen. And one of the things and that's just a loss. I totally agree with you. It's a tragic loss when that happens. And so many times after someone passes, it happens all the time. Oh, I wish I could ask them this question, or, oh, I never knew that. And how come I never knew that? And now I don't have anyone to ask. So,
right.
The cards are beautiful for getting conversations started. And I was really motivated to develop those because, yes, a letter is nice. A letter is wonderful, but not everybody's going to write a letter, and not everything's going to be covered in a letter. And a lot of stories are not going to be covered in a letter. And so to me, the relationships that you're trying to strengthen and nurture and kind of keep alive, even after a person dies, and the values you're trying to keep alive after a person dies, those can come out in conversation and in stories. So that was really the point of creating the cards, and they are total magic when people use them. So the other point I wanted to make is I talk about an ethical will as being a letter, but it can also be a recording. But what I always say about recordings of any kind is that if it's possible for you to have a transcript to have made also, that's also really valuable, because unfortunately the machinery to listen to the recordings or to watch the videos may not be accessible for people down the line.
Right.
And so that's also sort of just a tragedy when things are captured and then they get stuck someplace. And I hope that paper will always be accessible. And so I just encourage people to also think about using that medium. If they,
I agree. I agree, that kind of layered approach, because 40, 50 years ago when our grandparents lived there, we didn't have video back then, so that we've got the cassette, and hopefully there's always going to be a way to like preserve whatever medium it is that we have here in our time. Maybe 50 years from now, they'll have something else. But I just think it's really neat. A couple of weeks ago, I did a video with my dad about how did you meet mom, and was it love at first sight? These are things we always talk about, but to have it as a recording, and then he actually wrote it up like an article, like how I met your mom, and it's just, these are things that I promise you, for those that are listening or watching this, you will look back at these times with great joy that you get this information, and it really does build that relationship. And I appreciate you, Susan, sending me those cards, those conversations starter cards, because it was nice to kind of look to see what you do. Those are non-threatening questions, because I think part of the situation sometimes is with families is, at least what I've noticed as a social worker, 30 years ago when I first started, families literally lived down the street from each other. So I could go to Ethel and Marvin's house, and the kids could easily gather around the kitchen table, and we could talk about what's working well, what's not working well, what are your concerns about staying here at your house, what are your goals if you can't stay here at the house. We could do that all personally because everybody lived nearby. But as the profile of families have changed and families drifted apart because they've moved apart, if families and siblings don't invest the time, the effort, the energy, and the resources, it's expensive to stay in touch. But if you don't, then when there's that medical crisis with mom or dad, then you have to get reacquainted as siblings and then figure out, what are we going to do with mom and dad? maybe you haven't seen your parents for a few years. So these are really good tools that you created that are non-threatening questions, just kind of good icebreakers to really kind of get those conversations started that we would want to have with our families. So I've just, when we met, I was like, oh my gosh, you are just such an amazing person doing amazing work. So thank you for dedicating the last couple of decades to this type of work. It's very, very important.
Well,
Is there
it's incredibly
anything?
satisfying. It's incredibly satisfying.
Oh,
also
for
to do.
sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Is there anything before we close? Any last message that you want to have those listening to this podcast? Any takeaways or next steps for them?
Yeah, I mean, what I always say to people is, when they first hear about this idea of thinking about creating something that's enduring, some kind of personal message that's enduring, the most common reaction that I get is, that is really beautiful. Yeah. And then people tell me, oftentimes people say, oh, I got something like that. Or it's kind of like when I wrote a letter to my daughter when she went to college or got married or something like that. So people can really relate very easily to what this is. Or they say, oh, I wish I had one from my parents or something. So people relate really quickly to what it is. And then they say to themselves, then the voices start talking, when in their head, when they start to sit down and do it, it's like, well, I don't know, this feels like it's going to be hard or long or emotional, and maybe nobody's interested. And, oh, I'm too young to do this, and I'll do this later, And I mean, it's just such a common reaction. And I'm not saying it's easy to do. It is an emotional exercise. It's a spiritual exercise to really think about, well, what do I really want to say? And so what I say to people is start with something really small, make it just a page, and put down the one thing that you would want to make sure they knew from you directly. And for most people, that's an opportunity to say thank you, or I love you, or forgive me, or I forgive you. Those kinds of things you don't want to go to the grave not having said. Right. So put that down, sign it, date it, put it in a place where people can find it. And then, and I promise you that feels really good just to say that. And then you can add to it or change it as time goes on, but don't put it off, because you just don't really know what's going to happen tomorrow. And it would be a tragedy if that didn't ever get shared. So that's my lasting piece of advice.
I think one way to, because I can see for some folks where we're just having these types of kind of intimate conversations or questions might be a little intimidating. I think it might be kind of cool if they said, you know what, we're going to do this as a family project, so everybody, let's do this topic. You've got how many cards are in there? 12, 15? 12 cards. You'd be like, you know what, in February, we're going to answer this question. And in March, and do it like as a family team effort, like a team project. That makes it a little bit less intimidating. That's what I do with the grab and go binder. And I just say, like, we're going to start on this tab and everybody get that done. And then next month we're doing this tab. And it just seems, less intimidating because everybody's in the same boat.
And it's a shared experience. So like one of my favorite cards is to talk about an experience you hope that everyone would get to have. So you think about what a 16-year-old would answer to that. That might be going fast down a ski slope or whatever. And then you can imagine what an 80-year-old, how they would say an experience that they think everyone ought to have in their life. That would be a very different answer and a really cool conversation. So I love that. That's another thing I love about the cards is that they're two-way. And that people of all ages feel as though they're being listened to and understood. And I think that's, if this is all about relationships, which is what I feel like my products are, strengthening relationships over time and between generations, then yes, think about those cards and how you can use those. So I invite you to look at my website. All the materials are on the website, personallegacyadvisors.com. It's easy to reach me through the website. If you want to reach out, then I'd love to hear from you. So thank you very much for your interest in this.
Excellent. Well done. Well done. So thank you so much, Susan, for being our guest and for truly just all of the work that you're doing is it's just so important. And hopefully those that are listening to this will reach out to you. And I just want to say a huge thank you again for helping mend or even build relationships within families. It's really important.
Well, and likewise, I want to thank you and congratulate you for your incredible energy and beautiful work that you're doing for the same reason, to help families. So really important.
Very good. Thank you so much.
All right. Take care. Bye.
All right. You too. Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to the Care Right podcast. We hope today's discussion has provided you with valuable insights. If so, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share our podcast with others who might find it helpful. Remember, Care Right is more than just a podcast. It's a community dedicated to supporting family caregivers with comprehensive care planning, crisis management, and resources for every stage of aging. Stay connected with us for future episodes as we continue to explore essential topics in aging planning, elder care, and financial planning. Until next time, take care, plan wisely, and remember, you're not alone in your caregiving journey.